Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council. On behalf of the Council, on behalf of the Future Europe initiative of the Atlantic Council, I want to welcome you here for our conference today.
Thank you, Damon. My name is Rastislav Kačer. I'm Chairman of GLOBSEC, who's a partner of the Atlantic Council. On this day, I'm very proud and delighted to welcome you all to this conference. And let me take the right title of that, the United States and Central Europe, celebrating Europe whole, free, building the next century together. And I'm really delighted that the leading think tank in Central Europe is partner to you, the Atlantic Council, a long-time fellow and a personal friend to be here today with you to launch this.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to ask if we okay back there? Are we too close to each other? Give me. I know. All right, you give me direction. You give me help. Let's get this right. So, first of all, thank you, Rosta. Thanks, Ambassador Kačer. We're really grateful to you for your partnership, the partnership we have with GLOBSEC, to the entire team at GLOBSEC that's helped us run this over the next couple of days, and to all of our guests and speakers who have come. Many of you who have traveled across the Atlantic to be with us. We're really grateful. Grateful for your time. I want to welcome you all that are here in person, but I also want to welcome everybody that's following along with the proceedings online and watching this live streamed. And if you're doing that, I encourage everybody to join the conversation, to amplify the messages using the hashtag #StrongerWithAllies. The goal of this conference is to underscore, from our perspective, the U.S. commitment to a Europe whole and free, with Central Europe as an integral part of it. But it's also about how to develop an agenda for the U.S.-Central European relationship, ties for the future, as our title suggests, building the next century together. So we want to think ambitiously, yes, about the next century, in which what we consider our permanent alliance will provide the kind of security that was absent for much of the 100 years of our first set of 100 years of relations between our countries.
And this year, it's a sort of special. So this initiative, I think it's extremely well timed, because if we will look back, we are celebrating, or well, sometimes it's not always reason to celebrate everything, just reminding ourselves of some milestones in history. 100 years, 101 years of the settlement of after World War I, which completely changed Europe, and with the assistance of Woodrow Wilson and the United States, the map of Europe was changed. Czechoslovakia of 20s and 30s was a prime example of democracy, prosperity. This was very substantial contribution of the United States. Then the fall of Berlin Wall, it's 30 years. Without the United States, I wonder how Europe would look like in this critical time. 20 years out of the first NATO enlargement by 3 new members. Then 15 years of a large NATO enlargement, which both you and me, Damon, we were quite intimate part of. Ivan Korčok, who is here as well. And then we got to remind ourselves that these anniversaries really changed the map of Central Europe and put Central Europe as a part of Europe whole free together. And sometimes we should think how this would look if we failed, if this didn't succeed. We look in the eastern Ukraine, we look to unsettled parts of Balkans still today. I think this was a major, major success. Without contribution of the United States, this wouldn't be possible, and this was the best, as Dan Fried often says, combination of reason, of the values and the interest combined, producing the best results.
So Roster, because of the energy we're projecting, we're going to move away from that mic right there. Perhaps, is this, Chaz, you got us?
Yep.
Chaz, please, that might help a little bit as well. So apologies for the feedback, particularly for those of you online. All right, it is precisely because of that this conference is part of a broader commitment of the Atlantic Council to Central Europe. So let me just offer some context before we get underway. In the wake of the fall of the Berlin Wall, I would argue that Central Europe forged a very special relationship with the United States as Americans, many of those Americans in this room tonight, assisted these formerly captive nations in their transformations into free market democracies, and then into allies in NATO and members of the European Union, and soon after that later as coalition partners in battle. And in the past decade, however, you could argue that Central Europe in some respects came to be taken for granted here in Washington, as our attention shifted elsewhere, largely for pretty understandable reasons. And I think as a consequence, you can look across the region, you can look across the situation in our country, and you could wonder if the transatlantic bonds have receded a little bit. That American engagement in the region did it ebb for a little while. Electorates that were strained by an economic turmoil began to question this whole premise and promise of what is a Europe whole and free, what's its value. And against this backdrop, we saw a revanchist Kremlin move in, take advantage, and begin to try to halt that eastward march of democracy, to begin to undermine some of the post-Cold War gains that we experience, and to begin to sow mistrust within our own societies. And now we've seen China has shown up in a really serious way for the first time in the region. And so the United States, with its European partners, needs to be present in a serious way, in a major way. And unfortunately, since the illegal annexation of Crimea, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that's begun to change. We've begun to see this really change in a serious way. And that's what our effort, our common effort here, is aimed at, to help us ensure that we as institutions, as a broader community, can go on offense to help mobilize the alliance, to develop and implement strategies that are going to bolster ties between the United States and Central Europe, and to reinvest in that special relationship with the region. It's through this work, through that engagement, that we're trying to build stronger people-to-people ties, working with other foundations and the interns that we have here, the fellows who are coming from the region, and to foster champions of the transatlantic relationship like yourselves in the region as well.
Well, we've been working together for a long time, but today it's, anyway, a little special because I'm very proud to announce that we signed together a special memorandum today about our partnership on setting up an ambitious agenda for strategic partnership and common commitment to Europe whole and free based on democratic values and shared interest. And we want together, working together, set up a very constructive agenda for the US and Central European ties for the future. And I'd like to quote Fred Camp, the president and CEO of the ACUS here, and let me do the right quote. During times in which our democratic societies are facing unprecedented challenges, we cannot take the transatlantic relationship for granted. Against the backdrop of global uncertainty, it is now more important than ever to unite with partners that share a common commitment to working together to shape a better future. In there, this is a delight that we achieved together joint forces to, with a shared purpose to galvanize this transatlantic leadership to secure peaceful and prosperous Europe, whole Europe, and Central Europe, a part of a strong Europe together with the United States.
Ambassador Kocher, we're really pleased to announce the strategic partnership with GLOBSEC as a way that will allow us to integrate our work together, increasingly our research, our analysis together, to cross-fertilize our programming. But I think more importantly, a commitment to help foster the next generation of voices that will carry this forward. And within this partnership, we're going to really start in two key areas. One is this whole sort of Central Europe initiative and how we bolster the connections between the United States and the region and how we give life to that. And the second way is really to put that partnership into action by exposing, identifying, and analyzing disinformation that's been a problem in many of our societies. So as part of this fellowship, we're delighted to announce that our Digital Forensics Research Lab, working with the Global Communications Program in Bratislava, is going to establish what we call a joint digital research unit to have our researchers based in Bratislava working together to combat the scourge of disinformation and protect our democracies and our societies.
So we are already putting this partnership into action today at the Spring GLOBSEC Forum in Bratislava. We were presenting the report, a joint report of today. We are going to showcase this recent Atlantic Council and GLOBSEC report, which is titled The United States and Central Europe, Tasks for a Second Century Together. As I mentioned, we already did the European side presentation in Bratislava in spring, and I'm delighted that we have that. We follow on this here in Washington. The aim of the paper is to offer constructive policy recommendations to bolster this US-European strategic partnership with a special focus on Central Europe. And also we want to underline the progress which has been achieved in the last years. As you mentioned, we should not take things for granted, and we should look at the achievements, what we've done. These ideas, which will be shortly presented by Dan here, will offer a good food for thought and ground for our today's debate. This conference involving media, researchers, key decision makers, lawmakers, will bring a better understanding to this strategic importance of Central Europe, I believe, but also to the ties which are strategically so important for Central Europe as well, in the areas of security, trade, defense, democracy, all of the dimensions.
So before we proceed with the program this evening, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those that have had and have gotten involved in the Council's work on Central Europe to make it possible. We're going to have a significant announcement later on at the conclusion of this program. But before we get there, I just want to tip my hat to those who have stood with us the past couple of years as we built out our work on Central Europe. Ambassador Ron Weiser, Ambassador April Foley, Ambassador Colleen Bell, Ambassador Victor Ash, Ambassador Todd Sedgwick, the Hungarian Initiatives Foundation, Bank Pekao, PZU, Discovery, Imitel, Google, Bank Polski, PZU, LOT Airlines. These have been our partners in helping to stand up our work, and Darius Midowski as well. I also just want to acknowledge the support that we've had from the EU delegation and the embassies of the Slovak Republic, of Poland, of Hungary, the Czech Republic, Romania, in our work, and we'll see in some of the wine and beer that we enjoy later this evening from them as well. So now we've set the scene, we've given you a little bit of context about what we're trying to do here. Let's get this program started. And we have, I think, an exciting program tonight and something that's going to continue tomorrow as well. But we're going to begin the program this evening with something that's unusual for the Atlantic Council. A lecture by one of our very own, by Ambassador Daniel Fried.
Well, Ambassador Fried is going to address the title, The United States in Central Europe, What's Gone Right, What's Gone Wrong, and What's Next. And we asked kindly Dan to anchor this two-day conference because he's got the ideas. He's the man who needs very little introduction here in town. He's a serious career, one of the most respected career diplomats of the State Department. But he needs even less introduction in Central Europe because everybody knows him and he knows everybody out there. He's got such an intimate knowledge throughout his 44 years of service and his commitment to Central Europe. So it's very hard to trick him. You know, he's a tough guy on this, and he's been always. But to me, he is an example of a diplomat who was able to advocate for the best combination of love and reason in U.S. foreign policy and achieve the most out of that. And it's a huge respect to you, Dan, for that.
Indeed. When I just look at who we have here tonight, I see so many people who have been architects of this whole vision of a Europe whole and free that includes Central Europe, who are working on that every day. But Dan has an extraordinary record here. Indeed, when so many believed that the Iron Curtain was immutable, that we simply had to assume a Central Europe lost and repressed under Soviet domination and imported communism, Dan imagined alternatives. Dan could sense the thirst of freedom among the people. He knew people who were determined to shape their own destiny and was willing to hear them out and at times willing to take a bet on them. Ambassador Fried began his career serving in Leningrad, a very different time and place, in Belgrade. He worked in the Office of Soviet Affairs, something that thankfully no longer exists. And I think historically, he served on the Poland desk, where much of history began to unfold before his eyes, and obviously in Poland itself. And it was in that role that Ambassador Ash and others know well that Dan recognized the impending collapse of communism, and he began to help formulate an American strategy which ultimately led to NATO enlargement and to the idea of a NATO-Russia relationship. But to me, Dan's a lot more than a strategist. He was my boss. He was my mentor. And he was someone who inspired me to understand how the United States can be a force for good when our interests advance with our values together. And when we have big, bold ideas. And so with that, we want to invite Ambassador Dan Fried to the stage to share some big, bold ideas with us. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon, for that. I look around and see friends from many years, battles of many years past. Had a lot of fun in the Metzar days now, didn't we? Bravo. But that's appropriate, because this is a year of anniversaries. And the anniversaries we mark this year represent achievement mixed with tragedy. 100 years of U.S. relations with the newly independent nations of Central Europe. 80 years from the start of the Second World War. In part, the terrible consequences of U.S. strategic withdrawal. 30 years since Central Europeans overthrew communism, which led to the end of Yalta Europe. 20 years since NATO's first enlargement beyond the Iron Curtain, in which the U.S. played a leading role. 15 years since the EU's enlargement beyond that same line, led by Europeans on both sides and supported by the U.S. Why does Central Europe matter to the United States? As the U.S. learned the hard way, Central Europe matters because Europe matters. And when the United States has attempted to treat Central Europe as something apart from Europe, as an object subordinated to other foreign policy interests, something to be traded off, really bad results follow. The first U.S. policy towards Central Europe was embedded in President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, America's first grand strategy, announced 101 years ago. Wilson was trying to fashion, as the saying goes, a rules-based world, not spheres of influence, but a new system built on American power and reflecting democratic values. This included equality of trade conditions instead of closed economic empires, invitations to post-World War I Germany and post-revolutionary Russia to join the new system if, but only if, they respected its rules. Support for Poland and implicitly the other emerging nation states in Central and Eastern Europe, and establishment of a League of Nations backed by U.S. power to enforce the peace. This strategy was not vapid Wilsonian idealism as it is often dismissed, but reflected shrewd assumptions and massive self-confidence that U.S. national interests would advance with democracy and the rule of law, and that the U.S. would prosper best when other nations prospered as well. Thus, the theory went, America could make the world a better place and get really rich in the process. Central Europe's new nations were to be part of an undivided transatlantic community, their security underwritten by the United States. Wilson's 14 points did not survive their first contact with reality. Before the Versailles Peace Conference, French Prime Minister Clemenceau famously forecast, God gave us the 10 Commandments and we broke them. Wilson gives us the 14 points. We shall see. France and Britain insisted on imposing a punitive settlement against Germany. They were still committed to the old order of great powers and spheres of influence. Wilson wanted a new world. They wanted their cut. But the flawed post-World War I order failed principally because the United States would not back the peace that was flawed but workable. Communist Russia was weak. The emerging nations of Central Europe were democracies, seeking allies and models. Even after Versailles, the Germans still had pro-Western leaders. The weaknesses of the treaties of Versailles and Trianon might have been mitigated had the U.S. tried to implement the peace of which it was co-author. Instead, the U.S. withdrew from Europe. Wilson's political rigidity killed Senate ratification of the League of Nations, and the U.S. abandoned international leadership. It left the Germans to themselves, the French to deal with the Germans, and forgot about the Poles, Czechoslovaks, and Yugoslavs, of whose independence the US was a sponsor. And we pretended communist Russia wasn't there. Europe's post-World War I order collapsed, with Hitler's Germany acting as revisionist power. In 1939, Hitler and his new friend Stalin partitioned Eastern and Central Europe. The Second World War was on, and Hitler was soon winning. The Americans, late, finally understood the folly of our withdrawal. Roosevelt's initial war aims recalled the 14 points. In August 1941, he and Churchill issued the Atlantic Charter, which essentially sought to apply the 14 points principles to a prospective post-World War II settlement, including an undivided free Europe. But the military reality of World War II, the consequence of earlier US indifference to Europe, had stacked things against this vision. The Western powers needed Stalin to defeat Hitler. US thinking about Central Europe started shifting, and not in a good way. Walter Lippmann, today almost forgotten, but then America's foremost foreign policy thinker and co-author of the 14 points, argued starting in 1943 that the US would have to lead the post-war peace. So far, so good, but in concert with other great powers, including the USSR. Such was Lippmann's thinking. That meant that Soviet interests in Eastern Europe, Stalin's interests, would have to be respected. Lippmann had abandoned his own best work. And this was the first major US expression of a realist option for Central Europe based on spheres of influence. It assumed that the Atlantic Charter, expressing the 14 points principles, would apply only to Western Europe. It was the intellectual foundation of Roosevelt's tacit acquiescence at Yalta of Soviet control of Poland and Europe's eastern tier. This thinking emerged periodically through the Cold War, especially in President Nixon's détente with the Soviet Union, which also tacitly accepted Soviet control of the East Bloc, such was the term, in exchange for a general relaxation of tensions and strategic stability. But the Yalta axioms of a divided Europe turned out not to be the final word. Even under détente, Soviet-style communism did not work economically, and without economic success, it could not build political legitimacy. The Helsinki Final Act and CSCE process, and President Jimmy Carter's human rights policy, with his big Brzezinski, a major influence, injected values back into the US approach to Central Europe. Encouraged, dissident movements grew, and the first Solidarity in 1980-81 challenged the assumption that Yalta Europe meant stable Europe. In the wake of Solidarity, President Reagan turned US policy to the framework of the 14 points in Atlantic Charter, just as Soviet communism was entering its terminal decline. Like Wilson, Reagan held that America's interests and values ultimately were indivisible, and that security was not compatible with Soviet domination of a third of Europe. For his part, facing economic stagnation, the new Soviet leader Gorbachev had concluded that the Soviet system needed major reform to survive, and this had a foreign policy corollary of outreach to the West. A repeat of the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956, or Czechoslovakia in 1968, or martial law in Poland in 1981 were less viable options for him. On this basis, Reagan was willing to work with Gorbachev. Under these new conditions, starting in 1989, Central Europeans overthrew communism. President George H.W. Bush, combining strategic vision with tactical care, backed them. Riskier at the time than it now seems. The initial stages of post-communist transformation were fraught. Now it seems inevitable, then it seemed impossible. As Lech Wałęsa put it at the time, communism was like turning an aquarium into fish soup. No special skill required. But building communism after democracy, that was like turning fish soup back into an aquarium, harder to manage. But the Central Europeans succeeded. Their democratic free market transformation set the stage for strategic transformation. After fierce internal debate, President Bill Clinton set aside for the last time the Yalta axioms and, with Republican support, committed the U.S. to consolidate freedom's advance in Europe, working throughout with key allies such as Germany. President George W. Bush, with Democratic support, continued this course. Extending Europe whole, free, and at peace to Central Europe followed, through parallel NATO and EU enlargements. Though it remains a work in progress, as the Georgians and Ukrainians rightly point out, Central Europe's long and difficult road in the 20th century ended, as Polish dissident Adam Michnik once put it, like a Hollywood movie with an improbably happy ending. But this great achievement, a united Europe, including Central Europe, allied with the United States, forming the core of the world's democratic community, is now at risk, beset by emboldened authoritarians and doubts from within. This is true on both sides of the Atlantic and in all parts of Europe. Causes include economic stresses, unemployment and slow growth, especially in Europe, extreme and widening income disparities, especially in the United States, decline of traditional industries and the rise of new ones, generating new sets of relative winners and losers, and uneven benefits of trade. Issues of national identity are another source of internal stresses. This has been triggered by asylum seekers and would-be immigrants in the US from Latin America, in Europe from the Middle East and North Africa, and in the UK, concerns about immigration also seem to apply to people from Poland and others from the EU's eastern tier. In the US, years of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have fed dissatisfaction with the consequences of US leadership and commitments in the world. For these and perhaps other reasons, the world's democratic core is experiencing its worst period of internal doubt and dissension since the 1930s. Russia and China, aggressive and ambitious autocracies in their own fashion, may feel empowered to take advantage of this moment and may even convince themselves, as did the dictators of the 1930s, that their time has come. The US version of these trends includes nativism, unilateralism, and a style of disruption, including skepticism about a rules and values-based order underwritten with American power. The US political right of Reagan, which embraced its variant of American grand strategy, is being challenged by a political right which draws on the language and sentiments of nativist unilateralism of the 1930s, the old America First movement. President Trump and some of the administration have expressed hostility to the European Union on the false grounds that it was established to damage US economic interests and supposedly represents a globalist ideology harmful to American interests. President Trump has publicly and reportedly privately expressed skepticism about the value of NATO. Happily, the US administration has not acted on these elements of its rhetoric. Under President Trump, to his credit, the US has built on the Obama administration's leadership in strengthening defense of NATO territory against potential Russian aggression, including military deployments to Poland and the Baltics, and by encouraging the Europeans to invest more in NATO. The US has at least started to work through trade issues with the EU Commission. Nevertheless, US political distraction and flirtation with neo-nativism and unilateralism has opportunity costs at best and could lead to greater dangers as Russia and China seek to challenge the rules-based, values-based world that America led in building. Central Europe is living through its own version of the turbulent, shaking Western democracies. Its vulnerability greater given lower levels of prosperity, shorter traditions of democratic institutions, and the profound consequences of communist misrule. Central Europe's hard history and ongoing transformation make a complex legacy. After 1945, West European societies had 2 generations to work out issues of patriotism, liberalism, and nationalism, and they're not through yet. 40 years of communist rule deprived Central Europe of that opportunity. Under communism, many Central Europeans carried within themselves frozen memories of their nations, cherished recollections of an idealized past. This memory helped them survive the Soviet narrative. And when the time came, Central Europeans overthrew communism in the name of democracy and the nation, a powerful combination. But democracy and the nation are not always the same thing. Having recovered national sovereignty after 1989, Central Europeans leapt to the European Union, where they were asked to accept its sometimes post-national culture and pooled sovereignty, and this was not what many of them thought they were signing up for. Moreover, the shock of even successful transition from communism was great. The benefits of economic transformation did not spread evenly. Almost all gained, but some gained much more than others. Big cities developed quickly. Provinces were sometimes forgotten. Many who were part of the old communist system prospered under the new, their earlier collaboration notwithstanding, adding to a feeling of injustice. Central Europe's political reaction against disruptive change shouldn't surprise anybody. The US, UK, France, and Germany are going through versions of political reaction in the face of stresses, so why not Hungary and Poland? Given their history, it's easy to understand why many Central Europeans are socially conservative, protective of national sovereignty, and defensive about national values often interpreted in a conservative light. Conservative values are to be respected. Political choices, right, left, center, liberal, conservative, are for free nations to make. But weakening democratic institutions is another matter. Strong nations need strong, independent institutions in and out of government, an independent judiciary and free media, a free and well-regulated rather than politicized economy, the rule of law, and other foundations of democratic freedom must stand independent of politics throughout the West. Lenin and Stalin regarded independent institutions as mere bourgeois camouflage that must fall before the interests of the party or the leader. Do we think they were right after all? On the contrary, in the Western tradition, dating back 1,000 years and advanced in the Enlightenment, sovereignty is not absolute, and power is not the last word. Rulers are answerable before higher values. In the American Declaration of Independence, these are defined as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The preamble to the Polish Constitution of the 3rd of May, 1791, Europe's first written constitution, proclaims that political existence, external independence, and internal freedom are linked and more valuable than life itself. The past 100 years teaches us that when Americans and Central Europeans are true to their best values, they accomplish great things together. 30 years ago, Central European dissidents overthrew communism in the name of both national patriotism and higher transnational values of human freedom. They demanded that the United States act on its commitment to an undivided West rooted in these same democratic values. I and my colleagues were witness to and recipients of this call. We listened and tried to do our part, and the Central Europeans certainly did theirs. Having succeeded, the United States began to think that its work in Central Europe was done. We began to take for granted a united Europe that it had taken 2 world wars and a Cold War to achieve. We know now this was a mistake. We will, at this conference, discuss the policy agenda for the US and Central Europe, including from the Atlantic Council GLOBSEC report. But there are overarching tasks that must guide us. The United States needs to show up, remembering that its stake in Central Europe is part of its overall interests in a united Europe. We Americans must never again treat Central Europe as an object to be traded, nor as an instrument of wedge driving or leverage. Instead, we should remember the lesson from Wilson and Reagan that values ultimately have power when we mean it. Central Europe, for its part, needs to step up, remembering how the power of its commitment to democracy changed the world and brought prosperity, security, and national freedom to Central Europe and all of Europe. Central Europe became history's maker, not its object, and can do so again. And I hope that this conference will help show the way. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ian Brzezinski, and I'm a senior fellow here at the Atlantic Council. Let me first thank Dan for such powerful remarks and setting the stage for the rest of our day and for tomorrow. That was quite a clarion call to continue making history by the United States and Central Europe. I have the privilege of being on the spot conversation with Senator Chris Murphy. He is a senator in the United States Senate on his second 6-year term. He brings to that office a career in public service, including 8 years in the Connecticut General Assembly, 3 2-year terms in the U.S. Congress representing the 5th District of Connecticut, and in the Senate, he sits on key committees, including the powerful Appropriations Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And in the latter, he has defined himself as a strong proponent of diplomacy and international human rights. He's been a powerful advocate of American leadership, defined by strategic purpose and moral clarity. And he's been one of Congress's strongest proponents, supporters of NATO, and one that has also expected a lot of the alliance and our allies. So we're going to talk about Central Europe, and as Dan pointed out, this is a 100-year relationship we have with these countries. And I think a good baseline question to you, Senator, would be, from your vantage point on Capitol Hill, what are U.S. interests in Central Europe? Why is this still an important relationship? What are the political, economic, and military interests we have in this region and the relationship?
Well, Ian, thank you very much for having me. Dan, thank you for setting the table, and thank you to all of you for being invested in this relationship. Listen, I think Dan laid out that case very well, but if I can just add to it, it matters from our perspective, because Europe matters. The transatlantic relationship today is more important than ever as we try to figure out how we protect our own people's interests in a world that may be dominated by other kind of economic and political systems, i.e. the Chinese, in the next 50 to 100 years. If the United States and Europe don't link each other together more tightly, then we're done for. And Central Europe is, of course, a big player in making sure that those linkages remain tight too. It matters because Russia is on the march, and we see in and around Central Europe the opportunity Russia sees to try to undermine young democracies and to try to gain and grow its influence. Three, we are all young democracies. The United States and Central Europe, compared to us, they look younger, but democracy is not inevitable, and the health of their democracy is reflective of the health of ours, and we're seeing the same kind of attacks that Dan outlined, particularly these new isolationist nativist attacks on participatory open democracies, find purchase both in Central Europe and in the United States, and so we're better to link our causes together. And then lastly, we just have a strong legacy of Central Europeans migrating to the United States. We have parochial interests in our states and in our districts, which link us to this part of the world, and that commands the attention of many members who want to get reelected.
You mentioned the transatlantic dimension of this relationship, including the alliance, which is the institutional embodiment of our relationship, or at least our security relationship with the region. Well, as someone who worked on Capitol Hill in the 90s and tries to follow events on Capitol Hill, I've been struck at the level of congressional support, Republican and Democratic support for the alliance. I would argue it's at unprecedented highs. How enduring is this support for the alliance? Is this a manifestation or reaction to President Trump and his rhetoric? Will it be as strong if President Trump is not reelected? If President Trump is not reelected, will Republicans and Democrats continue to be as ardent in their support for the alliance?
So I think part of it is a reaction to President Trump's attacks on NATO, but it merely reflects what has long been a truly enduring bipartisan consensus around NATO. And you've seen that not only in the rhetoric from Congress, but also in our recognition that the open door policy of NATO is one of its key foundations, and our ability to bring in Montenegro and now Macedonia, I think, reflects the fact that we're willing to meet deeds with actions. I do think that there needs to be a reevaluation of the kinds of projects that NATO undertakes. And I think this is an opportunity for us to take this sort of renaissance of public commitment to NATO that is happening in Congress today as an opportunity for us to talk about whether we have the capacities in the United States and the things that we fund through the State Department and the Department of Defense to actually meet the real challenges that NATO is facing. I would argue that we are badly misresourced today when it comes to the real challenges that NATO countries present, and that our measure of contributions to NATO in military hardware dollars alone is not sufficient. So I would hope that this moment where we have two parties linking arms, committed to NATO, is also a moment for us to step up and think about some new capabilities that we can lend our Central European partners to try to face down the threats that they're facing.
Can you talk a little more about those capabilities? Are you talking about military capabilities? Are you talking about capabilities that are defined by commitment to shared values like democracy, rule of law, and such?
So I'm a big supporter of the European Reassurance Initiative. I think it's right that we invest that kind of money in a strategic defense relationship. But I also think it's blind to the fact that many of the challenges that Russia in particular presents to Central European allies fall outside of the purely military sphere. Senator Portman and I stood up a new capacity at the State Department called the Global Engagement Center, which we hope will seek to partner with countries in Central Europe to beef up objective journalism, to counter propaganda. Senator Johnson and I have a piece of legislation that we hope we can pass that would stand up a new $1 billion U.S. investment in energy independence, instead of just sort of giving advice to Central Europe on how they become energy independent of Russia. Why not actually put money on the table? Query whether, if we're going to go from $4 billion to $5 billion in the European Reinsurance Initiative, is that extra $1 billion better spent on purely military investment, or would $1 billion be better spent on actually building energy independence projects for the region? Those are the new capabilities that we talk a lot about, but we aren't always willing to invest in, that I think it's about time we do.
It's interesting you mentioned energy investment. I think the bill you've been pushing is very important because, as you may know, the region is driving forward the 3 Cs initiative, which is an effort to accelerate the development of cross-border infrastructure in energy, but also transport and telecom. Could you see the resources you want to allocate supporting 3 Cs initiative?
I just think we have to broaden what we view as national security investments, right? Russia sees the underwriting of its energy export as a national security investment. Nord Stream 2 makes no sense as a financial project. It is a national security project. The way in which Chinese technology is so much cheaper than everybody else's is because China views it as a national security investment to underwrite and subsidize the export of their technology. The United States traditionally looks at national security purely through the prism of investments in military hardware. Why not? Think about a major investment in energy independence for our partners in Central Europe as an extension of our national security spending. Why not look at a new investment in technology and trying to have competitors to Chinese 5G exports as an investment in national security? So I just think we've got to broaden that envelope. And if we do, I think we'll be able to offer a suite of tools for our partners in the region that right now they get in a subsidized fashion, but not from the United States.
You mentioned enlargement as one of the successes. But is enlargement, in your view, in NATO or in Europe, is that a finished process or should it continue? How do you feel about the transatlantic aspirations of Ukraine and Georgia to join the alliance? Should the alliance respond positively to those aspirations? Are we doing enough to provide them a path to membership today?
So the open door has to be an open door, and that ultimately means that countries that want to join the security alliance, as long as they pass the tests for membership, are given that invitation. Chancellor Merkel would tell us often that had Ukraine and Georgia been in the alliance, that we'd be at war with Russia in those two countries. Many of us look at it very differently. Had we extended the alliance, perhaps those countries would be enjoying control of their territory and a degree of sovereignty that they don't today. And so I don't deny that Ukraine has a long way to go until they are ready to join the alliance, but I think that the open door policy should remain an open door policy.
Is the region a zone of great power competition? You'd mentioned Russian pressure. You raised China as a new and very active, perhaps pernicious force in the Central European economy.
Well, I mean, this can't be a zero-sum game for Central Europe, and the United States shouldn't set it up as a zero-sum game. And I worry that when we talk in these terms of great power competition, we're suggesting that countries in Central Europe or countries in the Balkans have to make a choice. Of course, that can't be the case, and so we have to be competitive. We have to give economic and security options to those nations, but ultimately we need to build, I think, a relationship with Central Europe in which they are going to get certain things from the United States and from our alliance partners, but they are going to continue to have an important relationship, particularly an economic relationship looking east. I worry that the way in which we talk about great power competition suggests a false choice for countries in the region.
Let me throw one last question to you. Following on Dan's call or definition of overarching tasks that should define the U.S. relationship with our allies and partners in Central Europe, when you look forward to the next year, the next decade, say the next 100 years, what are the overarching tasks? What are the objectives that should drive our relationship with the region?
So I think understanding the challenges to democracy that are similar on both sides of the Atlantic and making communal investments in ways to fight those attacks. Again, I just don't assume that American democracy is going to be around for another 240 years. And so building those prophylactics together, I think, is important. I would argue this energy partnership is something that should guide us for the next 50 to 100 years. It's going to be the great question of the coming generations, how they keep the lights on, and who provides the resources to do that. And the United States can be much more integrated with Central Europe on that question as well. And then building upon our economic partnerships and doing that with presence. I thought Dan's last challenge was maybe the most important, making sure that the United States, both from a public and private sector standpoint, are present in Central Europe in a way that we have not been for the last decade to two, as we've taken for granted this relationship. So I think that public sector and private sector presence and using our public sector positions in the United States to push our American private sector components to be there, I think is an important part of the next chapter of our relationship.
Senator Murphy, thank you for your insights, and above all, thank you for your commitment to the U.S. relationship with Central Europe.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Is my mic on? Excellent. So I'll just provide a few housekeeping notes as we get the stage transitioned. I'm Denise Forsterber with the Future Europe Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. I work with Ambassador Fried on our Central Europe strategy, and I'm joined by my distinguished panelists and two of the co-authors of the report. So I think in just 1 minute we'll be ready to go here, but I wanted to go ahead and remind everyone of the hashtag that we're using. This is on the record, so feel free to follow along on social media. We're using the hashtag #StrongerWithAllies. And I think we are ready to go. So I would love to invite my fellow panelists and fellow moderator to join me up on stage. So I'd like to go ahead and get started by introducing one of our panelists, Miss Maria Magdalena Grigore, who is the State Secretary of Interinstitutional Relations with the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She previously served in the Ministry of Transport, where I'm told she was very important to the 3Cs work there, and we love 3Cs at the Atlantic Council, so I can't help shouting this out. And I'm also told you were integral in 3 of the projects that are currently on the priority list of projects for 3Cs. So we might drill into that later if we have a little bit more time. I'd like to turn it over to Elena now.
And we also have with us today 2 ambassadors. Ambassador Ivan Korczuk is currently the ambassador of the Slovak Republic to the United States. Prior to that, he served as the State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovakia, and he was also a permanent representative of Slovakia to the EU and ambassador to Germany. Also with us, we have Ambassador Jakub Wiśniewski, who is our own Vice President of GLOBSEC and Director of GLOBSEC Policy Institute. Jakub is former ambassador of Poland to OECD and also head of the Department of Foreign Policy Strategy at the Polish MFA. Ambassador Wiśniewski is also one of the co-authors of the report, together with Ambassador Fried, Denise, and myself. And my name is Elena Kusko. I'm Deputy Research Director at the GLOBSEC Policy Institute.
So maybe we just go ahead and jump right into it. If I could ask my fellow panelists to react a little bit to Ambassador Fried's lecture and Senator Murphy's remarks. You know, we covered a broad spectrum of topics. We talked about democracy, we talked about values, we dove into the security element with Senator Murphy. And Madam State Secretary, I'd like to go ahead and start with your reactions, please, and then follow with Ambassador Korczuk and Ambassador Wiśniewski.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'm really honored to participate in this timely debate focused on United States, Central Europe relations. As well, related to the report which was issued, we welcome the report, first of all, because it gives an insightful information, profound analysis, and also direction for the future. Really appreciate the tireless efforts and of Ambassador Dan Fried for his dedication to the excellent work undertaken as a contribution to a Europe free and, of course, living in peace. As well, last but not least, of course, I would like to thank for the Atlantic Council tireless efforts and GLOBSEC in studying and shaping US policy in Europe, particularly in Central Europe. As to the specifics of the report, please allow me to briefly highlight a few Romanian perspectives in the dynamics of US Central Europe partnership using the 3 key points rising from the framework of the report, namely values, as you mentioned also earlier, security and economics. When it comes about values, I don't think that anybody disputes Romania's hard-earned democratic credentials. Decades of communist oppression and the most aggressive totalitarian rule in Eastern Europe has been followed since 1989 by a progressive accumulation of freedom and an increasingly integration of universal and democratic values. Romanians, the people in Romanians, have fully embraced and the responsible exercise of liberal democracy and have made an irreversible commitment to upholding the rule of law and the principles of good governance and democratic accountability. As well, Romania's commitment to NATO and to European Union further formalized our commitments to the core set of transatlantic values, including our nation's reconciliation with the past. The second issue on security. Romania's commitment to European and collective transatlantic defense is, of course, and I hope you will all agree with me, unshakable. We take burden sharing seriously and have, for the past years, started to allocate increased resources, up to 2% of our GDP, to defense spending under an unanimous national political agreement, which extends this commitment over the next 10 years. I think you all know that Romania and we fight also in Afghanistan with a contingent which is the fourth largest of all NATO countries. We support NATO and EU security missions all over the globe. We partner with NATO and United States on critical missile defense protection, and we are paying close attention to the security challenges in the Black Sea area, which pose a strategic threat to all Europe, as it was mentioned also a little bit earlier today. Yes, indeed, we stepped up, Romania stepped up its security and defense contributions by increasing its deterrent capabilities, improving coordination and interoperability within NATO, and becoming a strong, reliable pillar for transatlantic security in the southern end of NATO's eastern flank. On the third issue, and that is economic, our engagement in the economic progress of the region has also increased. And I would like to mention the fact that during our recent EU Council presidency, Romania helped shape and adopt key EU decisions which will impact the further development of Europe in energy, connectivity, budget allocation, digital and copyright policy, a very important subject. We also like to say that we played an active role in the establishment of a comprehensive European energy security policy through investment connecting infrastructure between Romania and our neighbors. If we're talking about the connectivity towards the Republic of Moldova to the east, or Bulgaria, Hungary, respectively, to the south and the west. We also have been amongst the very early supporters and contributors to the development of this initiative that it was mentioned earlier, the 3 Seas initiative, along with Poland and also Croatia. The summit in Bucharest has indeed established the initiative as a genuine transatlantic undertaking, bringing the leadership of European Commission, US, and the major international financial institutions to the table for a joint effort aimed at restoring prosperity in Central Europe and providing an integrated agenda for economic development. Further, Romania is one of the 3 countries who has committed funds also to the 3 Seas Development Fund. To sum up, I'd like to say that I do share the report's conclusions, which states that United States must show up and Central Europe must step up. From Romania's perspective, I strongly believe that we have already, in a way, started a while ago stepping up ownership of security and economic development in our region, all this consistent with the democratic values which continue to uphold and unite our common transatlantic family, and also together with our fellow European Union member states and with, of course, United States. So, hence, we also expect that, as the report suggests, that the US will show up in a visible and tangible manner in our region in the near future.
Thank you so much, Madam State Secretary. Ambassador Korczak, if I may turn to you. You have quite an important role here in Washington as the ambassador of the Slovak Republic, and sometimes that involves having to translate both Slovak priorities and Visegrad priorities for folks here in Washington, which may sometimes be competing. So in your reactions to Ambassador Fried's lecture and Senator Murphy's remarks, I'd be very interested if you could also touch upon sometimes whether or not these are competing priorities and how you might navigate that, as well as how this fits into a broader US-Europe re-engagement strategy.
Thank you, Denise, and many thanks to the Atlantic Council and GLOBSEC for having me here, and especially for writing an excellent report. I have to repeat that because I've read that earlier, and I said that when the report was introduced in Bratislava. You wanted me to react or to speak after Ambassador Dan Free. That's difficult, but it is mission impossible to make any comments on what he said, because he has today yet again demonstrated how knowledgeable he is about Central Europe, and I just want to express my respect on it. Now, I've taken something from what you have said, what other authors have written in that report, and I was so glad to read right at the outset of the report a reminder that it was thanks to Central Europeans who in 1989 opened the door to Europe whole, free and at peace. And in fact, we have strengthened a democratic community which is known as free world. I believe today, 30 years since those historic days of Berlin, of the fall of Berlin Wall, it is extremely important to remember this. Number two, Central Europe is a success story. I mean, if you compare where we were 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and where we are today, I think we can share this success story with many others, and to make our story even more attractive to other regions like the Western Balkans, for example. But this report, which is reminding of this success, is a reminder as well, whether we like it or not, of legitimate questions that are being raised these days about Central Europe and Central European countries, as to what extent we are committed to values and rule of law and basic principles, you know, that has made us so successful over the last 30 years. And I believe this is a legitimate question which this report is raising, and I believe for all in Central Europe who are addressed by those questions, this is a good opportunity to say that we are committed to the values of democracy and rule of law. Number three, and Ambassador Free, he made that point, and it is showing up in the report, and for me this is maybe the most important message. Never ever should the US re-engagement with Central Europe, which we so much welcome, should lead us to a situation that we would be forced to make a choice between between the partnership with the United States and our belonging to European Union. Never ever this should be, the US re-engagement should be understood this way. This brings me also to another point, that the re-engagement and the US strengthened focus on Central Europe should not be understood that this is an effort to profile Central Europe either from outside, or we should be profiling us from inside Central European as a special political entity. On the contrary, in my view, what the re-engagement should support and mean at this moment is to make sure that we are a firm, integral part of a Western community. I believe this was the point of departure when we started the journey in 1989, and this is a legacy which should be protected at this moment. So I think this report is reminding us of it, and therefore I believe I just once again would like to thank you, Ambassador, and all the three authors which are with me here on the stage. And if there is interest, I can talk, of course, about Visegrad, which is playing such an important role in Central Europe. And I can say with just one word, this is a very pragmatic platform. We're building on, once again, our transformative legacy. But this will never, at least I'm speaking on behalf of Slovakia right now, this will never ever be an alternative to our membership to European Union. We are not developing something alternative in Central Europe with our strong cooperation with Visegrad. It's complementary to what we are doing in European Union. It makes us strong within the European Union. But once again, this is not, you know, an alternative. I will repeat myself to our membership to EU, or even NATO.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Ambassador, for the remarks, and thank you very much for praising the report. We're very glad that it actually resonates across a wide range of readers and speakers. But I want to throw the question now to Ambassador Wisniewski. And I want you to pick up where Ambassador Korczuk has left. You have spoken a lot about the emerging, increasing East-West divide in Europe. And where Central European, for objective or subjective reasons, is seen as something that is sidelined in the EU decision-making. What are the biggest challenges currently faced for Central Europeans, and how do they affect the prospects of US Central European re-engagement?
Central Europe has two big points of reference, the European Union and America. We can say mommy and daddy. Daddy providing hard security and mommy helping with the economic, social dimension of the development. I believe that Central Europe will only be important partner to America if it is an influential and integral part of the European Union. And America should not be using Central Europe as a tool to undermine the EU agenda, be it on, say, Iran, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, climate change policies, criminal court of justice, international criminal court. Central Europe cannot afford to fall into trap to be a Trojan horse for America, and it's not what America actually wants or should want. At the same time, I believe Central Europe is facing a certain challenge, how to make the region heard in the European Union framework, and how to propose constructive agenda. Recently, let's be honest, the V4 brand has been tarnished a little bit, and sometimes this criticism of Central Europe is not completely fair. Let me give you an example. Is the Nord Stream 2 contributing to the energy security and diversity of the European Union? No. I think that Poland's and other Central European countries' arguments have been disregarded. And this is where a voice of an objective, faraway friend like America is very useful, to be repeating and reminding about the strategic interest of the European Union. But not by ruling and dividing, just to make the context larger, to remind about the fact that we are one big transatlantic family.
And I want to throw the question back to Ambassador Korczuk as well, and want you to follow up on one of the issues that you mentioned before. We talked about what Central Europe is doing right and wrong, what the United States are doing right or wrong, but we haven't talked yet about what the European Union should do to increase both its global clout, but also to improve its relations with the United States. You served as a State Secretary for European Affairs. What is your perspective? What Europe should do more, and how Europe can be also a constructive and useful partner in the transatlantic relations?
I don't want to talk about what EU should do more, because I think none of the two are doing enough. Neither the United States nor the European Union to successfully master the historic test with which we are confronted in our transatlantic relations, whether we like it or not. And I'm concerned. I think partly a problem here, and I'm speaking on an experience of ambassador who came here last September, is that still there is not sufficient knowledge or misunderstanding about what the purpose of European Union is. And I can understand this misperception, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe while in the US foreign policy and the ultimate US interest is to preserve sovereignty, we in the European Union are doing something completely different. We are sharing and pooling sovereignty in order to be stronger together as 28 or very soon 27 member states. And therefore very often, logically, United States cannot understand, how cumbersome European Union is, how come that it is impossible to make a deal with individual European Union member states on trade, because trade is a common joint European competence. We are not sovereign anymore as a countries in the area of trade. And I think on the US side, I'm trying to see it from your perspective, it is very difficult to understand that. I am very much concerned that unless we really engage in a strategic dialogue between the United States and European Union, we are going to further drift apart. And I believe, that if you just look at how differently even current administration is approaching global issues and says, well, we don't see that it serves the US interest always to engage in a multilateral action because we do not see it is bringing results. But multilateralism, from our European perspective, is exactly the instrument how we can achieve our interests. The problem at this moment, in my view, is that we are not talking. The European Union as an institution and the United States, we are not engaged in a dialogue. How come, I'm asking, that the last meeting of the US Secretary of State, which I happened to attend, was in 2017. In fact, the dialogue, which is extremely important within NATO, is limited structurally to 2 ministerial meetings in a spring and in a fall within the NATO. How come that the closest ally of the United States, which is the European Union, the report rightly says so, is not at least twice a year meeting on the level of Foreign Minister, Foreign Affairs Council and the United States? I believe the lack of this strategic interest, of this strategic dialogue, is then resulting into something, in my view, which is weird. And this is that, how come we have such distant positions when it comes to Iran? How come that we have such distant positions when it comes to climate change? How come there are so many divergences between two of us? So I think the minimum that can be done on both sides is to engage once again in a strategic dialogue. We need to listen to each other's perspectives. Otherwise, I think we will have a problem. And maybe just last remark, and that's maybe overambitious, but why shouldn't we be? Why shouldn't we be a bit disruptive? Why should this, the re-engagement of the United States with Central Europe, which we applaud in Slovakia, in Central European countries, why shouldn't this serve as a sort of inspiration for a re-engagement between the EU as a whole and the United States? How come we are courageous enough, to re-engage with Central Europe? Because, as Ambassador Fried has said, Central Europe is worth that attention. But why shouldn't this serve as be a disruptive, attraction for the US and European Union equally? I'm not saying the EU should engage more. No, equally. We should meet somewhere in the middle. But this is my sincere appeal on both sides, on the United States and European Union. The US should, I think, more recognize that there will never be a restoration of transatlantic relations unless you recognize that the EU wants to have its own and powerful foreign policy. And I think it has not happened yet on this side of the Atlantic. And I'm sorry, I maybe moved a little bit too far from diplomatic language, but
No, that's why we really appreciate having you here, Ambassador. Thank you for your insightful comments and your passionate feedback. I'd like to pick up on the economic component of something you were saying and turn the question to Madam State Secretary. So one of the elements of the report talks about the importance of the 3 Cs initiative and how we should utilize this more as a vehicle to help further integrate these countries on the north-south corridor on the flank of Europe. Given Romania's historic role, and you hosted last year's summit, and so that was a great success, you've been very involved in the 3 Cs initiative. And what I'd love to know is, what's the significance of this for the region in promoting greater interconnectivity of telecommunications, rail lines, infrastructure networks, energy lines, and what role can the US and Central Europe play in helping to further develop and speed up this process?
Thank you
for the question. As I said earlier, it's a very dear project to me, especially from the connectivity point of view. I think that the 3Cs initiative is that strong example of pragmatic cooperation in the region with the aim of developing our economies, but also increasing the resilience to threats. And as we heard, there aren't a few over there in the region. Romania has been an early supporter of this initiative, understanding the importance to the dimension of connectivity and in terms of transport, in terms of energy, and of course, last but not least, this digitalization part. That's why from our perspective, it was very important to promote a few projects which would include the whole region, develop our infrastructure, but not only developing our infrastructure, hard infrastructure, but also bring this component, which is quite important lately, the soft infrastructure. Meaning, okay, it is very important to rehabilitate our railways, to upgrade them in order to be feasible. But of course, another important component that we have to deal with today is the soft infrastructure, meaning removing bottlenecks. Still, border crossing procedures are taking a lot of time. And that's why one of the projects that I thought it would be good to be included on the list of priorities was this software solution for logistical chains. And of course, what is good for logistic, what is commercial, it's good also for other types of transport, and would go there for so-called military Schengen or so, because the experience shows that there have been some problems taking a lot of time moving things from Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. So for us, it is important for the economic point of view, but I think that now we can say that fully that the political commitment has been shown from all the states which are involved in this initiative. I think it's time to step to the next phase and go a little bit more technical and find ways and why not think of some action plans in order to start implementing these projects that we chose and we believe that are important for our region over there. Again, I say not only from the economic perspective, but also from the resilience point of view. So the other thing would be to find the appropriate financial mechanism. So far we have, of course, the European funds for the infrastructure projects, connectivity, energy projects in the region. But again, these such routes that we are talking on the eastern flank, NATO eastern flank, are not. These routes, unfortunately, are not the European networks. So that means that they are not between the priorities in financing by European Union. So whether a support of this group of countries should promote much better the European Union Commission in order to allocate the necessary funds, or together with other partners like US, we can find some financial mechanisms in order to start implementing. We decided that it is, we have the political commitment, now we have a list of projects, it's a priority, so let's start to go a bit into technical, at the technical level, but also finding financial mechanisms in order to implement them so that we could say that to make the necessary steps in order to assure the necessities from the economic point of view, but also from the resilience point of view.
Thank you so much.
State Secretary. Now that we're done with the edict questions, I will have to ask more challenging ones. I will go back to Ambassador Fried's lecture, where he emphasized that US interests and values were aligned in 1989 and they're indivisible today. especially against the backdrop of growing authoritarianism in China and Russia and the offering of this alternative model to other countries, including the Central Europe, it's in the interest of the United States to promote liberal democratic order. It is also similarly in the interest of the European Union to promote this order. And we're talking about promotion domestically and abroad. And it is exactly the issue of democracy and the rule of law that is often the thorny point of discussion, both within the European Union, but also between the United States, Europe, and Central Europe. One set of the recommendations in the report includes the re-engagement on democracy and the rule of law. If we go a little bit beyond the statement that we're committed to the values, how exactly could the joint effort on promoting liberal democracy look like? And we can start with Ambassador Wisniewski.
I want to skip the controversial part of this question by saying that I assume that every member of a transatlantic community, subscribes to liberal democracy as a fundament of our community. But I think that there is a lot to be done together on the global scale. As we all know, liberal democracy is not something which is set in stone. It has to be adapted all the time to the changing reality. Technological progress brings certain challenges that we have to face. And I believe that America and Europe should be the ones who set the global standards as regards many things that come to our agenda. Say, hate speech on the internet, how do we regulate it? Electronic facial recognition tools, conventions protecting victims of humanitarian crisis, including immigration, standards of independent journalism in the world of social media especially, prevention of global money laundering mechanism, and all this should happen in the way that we do not build the all-powerful Leviathan state that would control and limit the freedoms of citizens. It's a hell of a job, but who should be setting the standards if not us? Chinese, Russians, North Koreans? No, it's the United States and Europe who should be together providing answers to all these tricky questions.
Ambassador.
Yep. When speaking about democracy and rule of law, let me quote what I have heard from Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, saying of illiberal democracy. She said it's oxymoron. I think this is the best way how to deal with that notion. And then Timothy Garton-Ash, who was recently awarded in Bratislava by Czech and Slovak Transatlantic Award, and he said of illiberal democracy that it is a fried snowball. Number three, I can't agree more again with what Ambassador Fried has said in his lecture and so many times before. Well, you can be conservative, you can be liberal, it's your choice. But where there is no choice are the democratic institutions, you know. So I believe this is extremely important, and none of us, be it in Central Europe, be it here in the United States or in the Western part, is immune, you know, to a constant attack against institutions. But this is what has made us, you know, strong. I think this is what we have so successfully built. But let me tell you my own perception, why I believe we have a problem explaining to our own people why we need those institutions. We keep on repeating, it sounds like a mantra all the time, rule of law and independent judiciary, independent media and institutions. People don't understand that. I think we have to link these, you know, appeals to these values to what people understand and tell them there won't be jobs in Slovakia, there won't be jobs elsewhere in Hungary and elsewhere, or not sustainable jobs, unless we have independent judiciary. Because without independent judiciary, you cannot have a competitive business environment. And without competitive business environment, investors from the United States, from Western Europe and elsewhere will not come to Slovakia and create millions and thousands of jobs. So this is a problem, I think, of all of us who are so committed to liberal democracy because we believe in it. We are unable to communicate why those values which sound so artificial all the time, when people in Central Slovakia hear us saying, or in Hungary and in Poland, independent judiciary, so what the hell is this? I mean, we have to be very clear why there is no alternative to it, because without that, there can't be prosperity and there can't be security in our country. So this is, I think, at stake in a way, to make sure that institutions are firm, they cannot be touched, although they're being assaulted. And number two, to convincingly explain to our people that there is no alternative to these values. But we can, I mean, say it here in this room. I don't need to convince anybody here, but it's much more difficult. What I'm saying, I'm sharing at the same time my experience, because I was traveling across Slovakia and reaching out to students in our countries. Not easy, but we have to try.
As I mentioned also in my intervention, I think from my perspective, my country's perspective, Romania have chosen long ago their path. Therefore, we decided to enter NATO. We are in European Union, and I can gladly say that right now still a huge majority of Romanians are still believing that there wasn't, of course, any other choice, but this is the right choice that our country has done. And secondly, when it comes of rule of law, I think that well, what we struggle now, at least in Romania, is to avoid the abuse of so-called independence. As we saw, freedom of speech or religious freedom over these kind of components have a certain sometimes limit abusing of them. Sometimes in freedom of speech goes to abusing freedom of speech, goes to disinformation, fake news. Religious freedom, abusing of this religious freedom goes to violent extremism, radicalization. The same in justice, rule of law. Okay, freedom is good, independence is good, but we also have to take care of not having abuses from this point of view. So I think that from this perspective, we, Romania, had this objective of fighting against corruption for quite a long time. We even kept it as our first, and sometimes believe that it was the only objective that we had, leaving the idea that we are corrupted. When you have only this objective and you say it every time, so many times, the people would say, okay, then you have a huge problem. That means you are a corrupted country, which is not the case. But anyway, it is a process that we are doing, but we have to do it not talking, too much about it, and also taking into account, assuming the responsibility of the stakeholders involved in the process of judicial system.
Thank you so much. So I think we should go ahead and open up questions to the audience, and we have some folks with microphones walking around, so just give us a moment and we'll take one from right here. Go ahead. And introduce who you are, please.
I'm Peter Humphrey, an intel analyst and a former diplomat. When Americans show up in Pyongyang or Tehran or the wilds of Pakistan, they have a target on their back. When a Romanian or a Slovene or a Slovak shows up in Pyongyang, not so much. This suggests something extremely useful to the United States, that our partners in this very delicate game of intelligence gathering can cooperate with the Central Europeans to the benefit of the collective knowledge of these very bad places. I feel that that is grossly underutilized, and that perhaps one of the incredible contributions y'all can be making would be to cultivate those skills those opportunities within your own small intelligence operations. So, comment if you can.
Thank you. And I'd like to expand that a little bit to talk more about how the U.S. and Central Europe, in addition to cooperating on intelligence sharing and information sharing, can cooperate more on security, which is also one of the elements of the report, in fact.
Should we take the second question? Because we're
Sure.
running out of
Yes,
time.
absolutely.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Clemens I'm an editor at The Hill. Thank you for doing this. Let me ask you to remove the safety foundation that you talked about, presuming that everyone was a liberal Democrat in the room and, suggesting, as the ambassador did, that Slovakia is not going to do X, America needs to resolve it. Let's presume for a moment in the future that the rise of a kind of pugnacious dark nationalism in America continues, that the president's convinces 35% of the American public, maybe let's call it 35%, that the payback for robust international engagement is weak and not really worth supporting. Let's just presume that and look forward, and that our relationships become more ad hoc and more and less predictable and dependable, and the kind of notions that you built into your answers are gone. I'm interested in what your strategy is then. Less for liberal democracy, but how do you begin thinking about your dashboard at that moment? Because I think that a lot of forums continue, if we just keep everything the way it is, but it's clearly not going in that direction now, and so what do you do?
Thank you. So, Ambassador Wisniewski, can I ask you to take that first?
It's a very tough question, and let me be honest. Let us imagine a country, member state of a European Union, let's call it Borduria, and it goes extremely undemocratic. And what do we do? It's also a member of NATO. I think that first and foremost, this is the matter for the European Union to deal with, because it has mechanism. There is Article 7, there are procedures, and also there are sanctions that can be easily used, and they are painful. They deal with money. There are transfers from regional policy, cohesion policy, that can be used to put into discipline. Although, as usually a given country is part of a single market, it can be part of the Schengen system. These are all benefits that no sane government would like really to give up. So from America, I would expect to take a back seat, conduct discrete consultations or not so discrete consultations, and also to show that alliance such as NATO depends on democratic governments cooperating together. So all the guarantees they apply, but they also need to be circumstances need to be taken into account.
Ambassador Korczak.
I'd like to react here on the first question. If I understood correctly, you said that it's underutilized our skills somewhere, which would help leverage, maybe together with the United States, our interests somewhere. And you mentioned showing up in Pyongyang and in Pakistan. I'm not certain whether you can expect Slovakia this, but I can give one example where we obviously can do together much more, and I think where we are doing more also on behalf of the United States, if you want. Slovakia, I think, was the first country that has signed a memorandum with the U.S. Development Assistance Agency, and we are supporting non-governmental sector and the pro-European forces, if you want, in the Western Balkans. Together, Slovakia and USA is spending money on running so-called convention on European Union, helping Northern Macedonia to get closer to European Union. So I think there are areas certainly where we can cooperate together. But I think it's for each country of Central Europe to look where we have our own skills and abilities. But we are certainly ready to explore those opportunities. And Stephen, I have not understood, frankly. I understood more what Jakub has said, but if you want me to, I'd be happy to react on it. But tell me what was the essence of the question?
The essence of the question
Because I don't
is-
want to circumvent and.
No, I appreciate that, Ambassador. I think that I think implied in much of your understanding is a presumption that America would somehow be this bastion of ongoing dedication. Institution. But I think in your comments you raised some concern about the dedication of those institutions and principles, and I think Jakob did as well. When I've been pouring through data today, polling data, attitude data, and it's pretty remarkable how resilient the disregard and disinterest in international engagement is in the United States right now. And so if you look at the political ramifications of that down the road, if you look at the rise of what I call pugnacious nationalism continuing, which is a disregard for international institutions, I'm interested in what the strategic dashboard of our European partners are today if trends that we see going today in the United States continue. Because I think it throws into real... So I wonder... To remove the plank about saying, I hope we all believe in liberal democracy, I don't think we're going to be able to say that much more. We have to have a different kind of discussion.
First, we are concerned over it because we are aware of these developments here, and it's when you look at the scoreboard, you know, of what foreign policy decision this administration has done already, we are not happy about that. Let me put it that way. In Europe, and I think I can speak a little bit about, or on behalf of the European Union, the only response and only strategy for the future, if this continues, is to make European Union stronger and more independent. We still, you know, have to do it in a inclusive and cohesive way. Let me put it that way. Certainly, when it comes to our ambition to do more in the area of defense cooperation, we need to talk again here in this very area as we are trying to develop our own military capabilities under PESCO, if you want, and European Defense Fund, and explain here and take seriously concerns that our American friends are communicating to us, because they believe that we are going to decouple while developing, as I'm saying, the military capabilities. We should not, however, give up on it. But the logical response from Europe, because, you know, individual response from such a small country like Slovakia would make no sense. Slovakia is part of European Union, and its effort to simply be stronger on a global scene, inevitably, I think it will lead to it. That would be my response.
Madam State Secretary, if you would like to make any comments about the security relationship or what more we can do together with our allies.
Well, we're still talking about Central Europe stepping up or US showing up in the region. As I mentioned, from the security point of view, again, I agree with my colleagues here in the panel that yes, from the rule of law and so on, European Union is over there and has the tools in order to direct towards this path. In terms of security and economic development, maybe there we need more of United States to show up in the region. As I mentioned, from our point of view, from our perspective, we already a while ago have stepped up from the security point of view in terms of being present in Afghanistan, having increased the contribution for defense in most of the European Union countries. And again, I would feel the need of United States to show up definitely from the economic point of view. So, well, let's hope that this will happen.
Can I say just one word, because Senator Murphy was here, and for me the most important point that he has made was he said that the US should broaden the scope of security, how we perceive it, and he referred exactly to Russians who are using such instruments like Nord Stream 2. I totally agree with him. And that connection, he made another point that maybe this is the moment and time and opportunity for the US, and he said, I paraphrase, the public sector to encourage private sector here in the United States to look at business opportunities in Central Europe. And I think the vehicle, which was mentioned here several times, could really be the Three Seas initiative. And I want to congratulate the Poles who have invested 500 million, Romanians 50 or 100, I don't remember. I'd be working on it to try to convince my own government to step into it more actively. But maybe this is really the moment for the US to do what you've done, and I'll conclude by it, in the 90s, where you have created the enterprise funds. And I've heard recently that you made a nice money on it. It would be good politically if the broad audience in Central Europe, people in Slovakia, would see American investment in something tangible, because we have private investment, but we don't have, I mean, there is almost zero private investment, zero public investment from the United States in our region. And of course, in a caveat, a very important caveat is defense. This is the biggest investment, public investment of the United States. But you know what I mean. And I think there are good opportunities for both public and private investment from the United States. It would hugely benefit a public and political perceptions in Central Europe.
So please join me in thanking our panelists. We've unfortunately run out of time today, but everyone should have received a copy of the report, and if you haven't, feel free to grab one on your way out. We are now just going to have a little bit of a stage transition, so bear with us as we get everything set up, and thanks again for joining us.
Please, Paula.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a terrific panel. And the focus on the report and the collaboration between the Atlantic Council and GLOBSEC, I think, is terrific. And in fact, the entire morning has just been absolutely terrific. Now, tomorrow, let me give you a little bit of a preview. We look forward to continuing these conversations. And at that time, we're going to be welcoming to the stage the current Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, Ambassador Phil Rieker. We will also have a town hall meeting with the Polish Foreign Minister, Czaputowicz, the Hungarian Foreign Minister, Szijjártó, the Czech Deputy Foreign Minister, Schmilis, among others. And then we'll also be having a closed session, or should I say not closed, but closing session, with the Slovak Foreign Minister and OSCE Chairman, Chairman in Office, Miroslav Lajčák. But this evening, we still have a very important agenda to fulfill. So over to Damon.
Thank you, Paula. We've gathered to mark the milestone anniversaries which made Europe whole and free possible. But we've also made the case, and you've heard in the conversations, that we cannot take Europe whole and free with Central Europe as an integral part of it. We can't take that for granted. And we understand that that's why the Council's work, what we've been talking about, is about the future. How to build the ties and develop a meaningful agenda for the next decade, the next century, a century in which we hope this idea of a permanent alliance with these nations provides the kind of anchor of stability and security, so the region is an important partner of the United States globally. And then I would say, for us to close out this evening, I'd hearken back to what our chairman, Executive Chairman Emeritus General Jones tells us, that vision without resources is hallucination. And so this evening, we're particularly delighted to announce the launch, as some of you may have noticed, of the Weiser Family Distinguished Fellowship to help anchor the Council's work on Central Europe. This fellowship and the programming on it about Central Europe it supports is made possible from the very generous and significant gift from Ambassador Ronald Weiser and his wife, Eileen. Thank you very much, Ron. Ron is with us tonight, and I want to thank you. Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know Ambassador Weiser, Ron's a pretty remarkable individual who served as U.S. ambassador to the Slovak Republic at a critical time. He was founder of McKinley, a national real estate management company. He's on the chairman of the board of the Regents at the University of Michigan, a place that is passionate to his heart. And now I'm delighted to say a member of the board of directors of the Atlantic Council. We really appreciate you being with us, Ron.
Ron, I'd also like to, on behalf of the board of the Atlantic Council, also thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We are just extremely grateful for your support, your leadership in a region which is very central to this institution. So really, thank you for your many contributions and for your generosity. Let's give him another thank you. But we're not quite done yet, because before we have you come forward, let us at least discuss what is the result of your generosity. This evening, we're very delighted to be announcing that Ambassador Dan Fried, former Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, former Special Assistant to the President, and former Ambassador to Poland, he will hold the inaugural Weiser Family Distinguished Fellowship at the Atlantic Council. I'd like to say Dan is a very long-time friend and colleague and extremely well-deserving of this fellowship. He and I actually first met in the Reagan administration. He was Polish desk officer and I was working on Central Eastern Europe at the Reagan NSC. And I have to say, I was always impressed by Dan's passion for the region, your deep knowledge, and also your extensive context. The fact of it is, Dan knew everyone and everyone knew Dan. So I want to congratulate you, Dan, but I'm not quite done yet. We heard from Dan earlier, and we know that he's a national asset, and the Council is very lucky to have you on our team. We can really think of no one better who has done more to advance the cause of freedom, security, and prosperity of Central Europe and to bolster the region in an alliance with the United States than Dan Fried. Clearly, your longstanding work in this area, I use the term, is non-pareil. We're fortunate to have his extraordinary talent here, and I have one last to share of there are many vignettes to share with Dan Fried, but we have very little time. But this one I do want to mention because it undergirds the spirit of what we are here today about. One of the most memorable moments for me was when you were awarded by Polish Foreign Minister Bronisław Geremek a Medal of Honor and for your very long-standing work on bringing Poland into NATO. So, historic indeed, and Dan, just congratulations to you. Damon.
Thank you, Paula. This is a special moment for me, not just because I'm a manager or leader at the Atlantic Council, delighted to have the resources to be able to do more important work on Central Europe, but it's also because I had the chance to work very closely with both of these individuals. And I've seen how they've helped make the world a better place through their ideas, their actions, their values, and a sense of relentless determination, if you know either of them. I had the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to work with Dan Fried at the National Security Council on his team, and I learned so much from Dan about Europe, about Central Europe, but I also learned just the practicalities of being able not just to have a vision, but how to translate that vision into strategy, into policies that would deliver results, and in this case, deliver the result of securing freedom, enlarging our alliance, and anchoring all of Central Europe within NATO and the EU. Dan truly was an architect of the concept of a Europe whole and free. But at the same time, I was able, when I worked at the NSC, I had the opportunity to watch Ambassador Ron Weiser in action out in the field as he served as U.S. Ambassador to Slovakia. And I watched you masterfully advance U.S. interests in the country, ensuring that a country that had missed the first opportunity to join the alliance, that it sure as heck wasn't going to miss the second opportunity to join the alliance. And in fact, with your support, was at the head of the pack when we came to that round of enlargement. And I watched how Ron really distinguished himself as an ambassador in the field, bringing a sense of creativity to policy, charm, and ability to build extremely close relationships with people that mattered at key moments, and a relentless focus on getting the job done, producing results. So we are so honored to have a fellowship named at the Atlantic Council in honor of your family. I want to invite you to the stage. Paula and I would love to invite you to the stage to say a few words to help close us out this evening. Thank you, Ron.
can see how they welcome me. This is my reserve, Mr. Wilson here. And you can see that I well prepared my notes as I was sitting on my reserve seat of Mr. Wilson. So I can't tell you how honored I am to have Dan Fried as the first fellow of this fellowship that we've set up. Because Dan, it was your instructions to me before I left that helped me form the strategies that we used with in our embassy. And I noticed that my two former deputy DCMs are here today too. And as they know, when I got there, I didn't know very much, but I did know about strategy, tactics, and keeping them safe and making sure that we went in the right direction. But I was asked by Damon to say a few words of why I care about Central Europe. I have a tie to Central Europe. When I didn't know I was going to Central Europe, I was asked by the president to take what he considered a very difficult job when I was asked to serve, and as it happens, it wasn't Slovakia, it was Romania. And for a variety of reasons, they decided to change about 6 months in and gave me some choices, and Slovakia was a great opportunity, I felt, to help change a different path, because as Dan said, without them sharing the same values as we do, because NATO is a alliance of shared values, that if the old authoritarian prime minister took power, that it would be very difficult for us to support their entry into NATO, and told me to figure out the strategy to make sure that we had a continuing democratic government in Slovakia. So I went out and visited all 138 cities in Slovakia and delivered the message. I remember Dan talking about, and I think the ambassador talking about message, and I found it to be most valuable talking directly to the people rather than being a talking head from Slovakia, from Bratislava, and that was a real opportunity to meet and know what Slovakia was, and it was quite an extraordinary place. In all 138 cities, there were different kinds of people. There were different parties in control, and if you've ever traveled Slovakia, getting to those cities is not an easy thing. Remember bumping around a lot of bumpy roads in those days. At any rate, I was able to deliver the message of the importance of this country, of Slovakia, maintaining the shared values of NATO and the importance of NATO. And with our friends in the EU, I was able to say, look, it's the same people, and if you don't get into NATO, it's going to be pretty difficult for you to get into the EU. And we were able to get them to understand the importance of being in NATO at that time, and because there was not universal support for entry into NATO, either among the parliament or the people of Slovakia. So that was able to change, and I learned the importance of diplomacy at that time, and that's why I'm so thrilled to be involved with the Atlantic Council. As a regent at the University of Michigan, and as they mentioned, now the chairman of the board of the Regents, I was able to help found something there called the Weiser Center for Diplomacy, which will be the only center that will be at the Ford School that will be focused on diplomacy in the Midwest. As you know, there's East Coast and West Coast focus on that, but I'm really proud that we'll be able to focus on bringing some of the young people from the University of Michigan into the diplomatic world, because it's such an important world. And I just wanted to tell you something that I say quite often when I'm at the University of Michigan, when I'm talking to people, is these shared values, it may not be democracy as we define it in the Bill of Rights in the United States, but it's freedom that everybody shares, and that drive is universal. And the freedoms that I find to be the most universal are the drive for a better life for yourself and your family, and the second, the freedom from fear from your government, the police, and your neighbors. And those are things that are now well ingrained in Slovakia and all of Central Europe, and that's why I think they're so important to the United States. And this council, I think, and all these people that are here, you can help spread that message as I did, and that's going to make a difference, I believe, in understanding among the American people and the people of Central Europe, understanding the importance of the alliance between the United States and Central Europe. I think it's an important alliance for the future, and Central Europe is really the bulwark against I think the expansion of totalitarianism in the future is there. I found that fear there when I first arrived in 2001. So yeah, just after 9/11, it was they were very frightened of what could happen, and I think that's something that they now don't have that fear of, but they do again, and they didn't have it for a long time, and they do again, and whatever we can do to take that fear away is an important job for all of us. So I thank you for letting me say a few words, and I'm really proud to be involved with this center, and thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm going to have you stay here just for 1 second. I'm going to ask Paula to rejoin me. Ambassador Fried, come up. And if you could pick up this underneath the red there. I just want to present to Dan Fried and congratulate our first inaugural Weiser Fellow Family Fellowship. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being with us tonight. Really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow with the ministers. Really appreciate your time and your engagement through the evening. Thank you.